post-mortem examination revealed that Jay had been dead for over 3 days and that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to a combination of strangulation and having toilet paper and a rag forced down his throat. Hello and welcome, my name is Gabby, and in today's video we are talking about a murderer who was one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted men. This is the case of Gary Ray Bowles. On Sunday the 20th of November 1994, Belinda Hinton went to the mobile home in Duval County, Florida, where her 43-year-old brother Walter Jamel J. Hinton lived. With her was her fiancé William. The couple were concerned about Jay as no one had seen him for days, and he'd not only failed to arrive at work for 2 days in a row, but had missed Belinda's birthday the previous Friday. They had gone to Jay's home several times previously, finding the mobile home's lights on but no one answering the door, and Jay's Cadillac missing, before deciding that enough was enough and they were going to look inside the trailer. As the door was locked, William broke in by breaking a back window. Upon entering, he was confronted with a foul odour and made his way to the bedroom, which is where he found it in disarray. Moving on to the bathroom, he found blankets covering a large object on the floor. Pulling the blankets aside, he saw it was the beaten and decomposing body of Jay. William and Belinda immediately went to the neighbour's house to call the police. The crime scene was carefully examined, with forensic evidence being collected from the mobile home, while police interviewed Jay's friends, family and neighbours. In the mobile home, investigators found that Jay's wallet along with his personal papers were carelessly strewn on the bed, beside which was a pile of sheets on the floor and a large blood-covered concrete stepping stone weighing approximately 40 pounds. A large concentration of blood was splattered on the bathroom floor, and miniature liquor bottles and beer cans were scattered throughout the home, and Jay's watch was also missing. Investigators also discovered a receipt bearing the name Timothy Whitfield. A post-mortem examination revealed that Jay had been dead for over 3 days and that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to a combination of strangulation and having toilet paper and a rag forced down his throat. Additionally, the bones on his face were broken from his cheekbone to his jaw, an injury being consistent with Jay being hit with the concrete stepping stone, and he sustained 5 broken ribs along with abrasions on one arm and leg, suggesting that he'd struggled against his attacker. The prime suspect was quickly established to be the house guest who'd been living with Jay at the time of his death, the Timothy Whitfield named on the receipt that had been found. A composite sketch of the suspect was put together based on descriptions provided by witnesses, and police began their search. 2 days later, the police found and arrested their suspect at an employment office in Jacksonville. During the interrogation, the suspect confessed to the murder of Walter Jamel J. Hinton, saying that on the Wednesday 16th of November 1994, he, Jay and a friend of Jay's had smoked marijuana, had a few beers before they dropped the friend off at the train station and returning to the mobile home. Jay had gone straight to bed, but the suspect had stayed up and continued to drink. He claimed that at some point during the night he snapped, retrieved a concrete stepping stone from the front yard and briefly sat it on the table before taking it into the bedroom where Jay was sleeping and dropping it on his head. He then strangled him and stuffed the rag and toilet paper down his throat. The suspect admitted to something else as well. His name wasn't really Timothy Whitfield. It was Gary Ray Bowles, and Gary Ray Bowles was a wanted man. In fact, the Friday before his arrest, he'd be put on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for a string of murders in multiple states. Gary Ray Bowles was born in Clifton Forge, Virginia on the 25th of January 1962, his father having died 6 months earlier. His mother went on to remarry several times but had a habit of getting involved with the wrong sort of men. At the age of about 7 or 8, Gary started to suffer abuse at the hands of his first stepfather, who often beat Gary and his brother with his belt and fists. When their mother tried to protect them, she also became a target of his abuse. Eventually, she divorced him, but unfortunately, the man she married next was just as bad, if not worse, being a violent alcoholic who frequently flew into rages and beat her and her sons. At the age of about 10, Gary started sniffing glue and paint, as well as experimenting with other drugs before dropping out of school in 8th grade. The abuse continued for another year, then when Gary was 13 or 14, he and his brother reached breaking point and ganged up on their stepfather and severely beat him, with one of them hitting the man on the head with a rock. Despite everything, Gary's mother chose to stay married to his stepfather, resulting in him leaving home shortly after him and his brother had attacked the man. With nowhere to go, he lived on the streets, making money by selling himself to men. However, it should be noted that he wasn't actually gay and had a number of girlfriends, the relationships being frequently violent. In 1982, Gary was arrested for severely beating and sexually assaulting his then girlfriend, a crime for which he was convicted and sentenced to 6 months in prison. In 1991, he was once again sent to prison, this time for unarmed robbery, having pushed over an elderly woman and stealing her purse. He was sentenced to 4 years, of which he served 2. Gary committed his first murder, or at least the first murder that we know about, in March of 1994. At the time, he was living with 59-year-old John Hardy Roberts in Daytona Beach, Florida. It is believed that Gary was providing John with sexual favors in exchange for a place to stay. In his later confession, he said that he and John had got into an argument over a woman, resulting in John telling him to leave. Blinded by rage, Gary attacked John with a glass lamp, repeatedly bludgeoning him on the head before strangling him and stuffing a rag into his mouth. When Daytona police eventually arrived at the residence sometime later, they found John's body on the floor with one of his fingers almost severed from his hand. Blood was splattered everywhere, and the glass lamp that had been used to bludgeon John was shattered, as was the glass table that John had fallen through during the struggle, and the victim's car and wallet were also missing. Gary's fingerprints and probation papers were found at the crime scene, and a manhunt quickly ensued. However, while John's car was found in Georgia, Gary was long gone. After John's death, murder became a habit for Gary. His modus operandi was to hang out in gay bars to look for potential victims. When he found one, he would offer to do household chores and provide sex in exchange for a place to stay. Then, after living with them for a brief period, he'd kill them, steal their money and, if possible, a car, and move on to a new location, trying to stay ahead of the police's manhunt. His second victim was 38-year-old David Jarman, whose decaying body was found by a maintenance man in the basement of his apartment building in Silver Spring, Maryland, on the 14th of April 1994. Like John, he had been beaten before being strangled to death and having a rag stuffed into his mouth, and his car and wallet were missing. On the 5th of May, the decomposing remains of a 72-year-old Milton Bradley were found behind a shed on a golf course in Savannah, Georgia. Like the previous victims, he had been beaten before being strangled and having material stuffed into his mouth. A palm print that was later matched to Gary Ray Bowles was found at the crime scene, and witnesses reported seeing Milton in the company of a man matching Gary's description in the days leading up to his murder. The same month, the body of 47-year-old Alverson Carter Jr. was found in his home in Atlanta, Georgia. The details of the murder matched those of John, David, Milton, and forensic evidence linked Gary to the crime scene. In July 1994, the murders were featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted. At the time, Gary was living in a shared house with several others, and his housemates, upon seeing the episode and recognizing his picture, called the police. Gary was taken in for questioning, but incredibly, a tan and a mustache had changed his appearance enough for the police to conclude that they had the wrong man and let him go. Having failed to check for identifying marks, Gary being known to have 3 tattoos and old knifing scars. The same month, the body of 37-year-old Albert Morris was discovered in his trailer in Nassau County, Florida. He had been beaten about the head, shot in the chest and strangled. He also had a towel tied around his head and stuffed into his mouth. His car and wallet were both missing. The night before his body was discovered, Albert had been seen arguing with a man matching Gary's description at a bar, which resulted in both of them being thrown out. In November, Gary met Walter J. Hinton and agreed to help him move some of his things from Georgia to his mobile home in Florida in exchange for being allowed to live there. We already know what that led to. Following his arrest for the murder of J. Hinton and his admission of his true identity, Gary confessed to the murders of John Hardy Roberts, David Jarman, Milton Bradley, Alverson Carter Jr., Albert Morris, and Walter J. Hinton. During the trial, Gary's defense claimed, among other things, that Gary suffered from mental instability when he killed Jay as a result of childhood trauma, which was exacerbated by the use of marijuana and alcohol on that night. The jury was unconvinced and, after adjourning for a brief period, found Gary Ray Bowles guilty of first-degree murder and robbery, with them recommending the death sentence by a vote of 10-2. The sentence was later overturned by the Florida Supreme Court following an appeal by Gary's attorneys, and remanded the case to the State Circuit Court for resentencing. Following the resentencing trial, the jury returned with their verdict after only 1 hour of deliberation, unanimously finding Gary Ray Bowles guilty and again recommending the death penalty. Following the second trial, Gary's attorneys filed a second appeal, which was denied. Gary Ray Bowles was executed on the 22nd of August 2019 at Florida State Prison, aged 57. If you enjoy true crime and my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean a lot to me. But until I see you again, please be safe, be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.